They laughed in the lobby, loud enough for strangers to turn. My mother did not stop them. My father looked at his phone. The officiant cleared his throat and stepped aside. Someone adjusted a microphone. I stood there in my dress while people I grew up with pretended not to see me. My sister whispered something and smiled for a photo. The doors stayed closed behind me. No one asked if I was okay. No one said my name. Cameras kept rolling. I held my bouquet still, because shaking would have meant answering, and I had learned silence was safer. I had spent years learning how to take up less space without disappearing. At work, I waited until others spoke first. At home, I translated my needs into jokes. In my family, silence was treated like good manners, especially from me. So when that afternoon unfolded the way it did, no one thought it was strange that I said nothing. They were used to my compliance. They mistook it for agreement. The authority in my life had always been my parents. Not in a dramatic way. There were no slammed doors or shouted rules. Just expectations that floated in the air and settled on me. Be practical. Do not embarrass us. Make choices that look sensible to others. When I met him, I knew immediately how they would categorize him. Skilled hands. Honest work. No title that could be said proudly at a dinner party. My father asked polite questions that felt like measurements. My mother smiled in a way that meant wait and see. They did not forbid anything. That would have required ownership. Instead, they withheld approval and called it concern. When invitations went out, my mother said it might be better to keep things small. When the guest list shrank, she said it was a relief. My sister offered to help with planning, then went quiet when I asked her to confirm dates. The officiant called twice to check the head count. I said it was fine. On the morning of the ceremony, my father texted that there had been an emergency meeting at work. He would try to make it. My mother said traffic was terrible and parking unpredictable. My sister sent a photo of her shoes with the caption, "Still deciding." I took a breath and adjusted my dress. The venue staff moved with careful efficiency. They avoided my eyes. What hurt most was not their absence. It was the ease of it. The way authority can disappear without explanation and still expect obedience. The way silence can be framed as neutrality. I watched people choose convenience over fairness in real time. No one made a scene. No one argued on my behalf. It was easier to let the moment pass and deal with the aftermath privately. When the cameras were adjusted and the music cued, I understood that the choice had already been made. Not by me. By everyone who decided that comfort mattered more than showing up. I walked forward because stopping would have meant asking for permission I no longer wanted. My steps were steady. My face was calm. Inside, something closed, quietly and completely. I remember noticing dust in the light, the faint hum of the air system, the way my ring felt heavier than expected. These details anchored me. They kept me present. Authority loses its grip when you stop waiting for it to validate your choices, and that realization settled without drama, like a door closing gently behind me. No one could reopen it then. Later, when people asked if I had been surprised, I realized how practiced I was at rewriting history to protect others. I said things like, "It was complicated," or "They needed time." The truth was simpler and heavier. This moment fit a pattern I had spent years pretending not to see. I was always the one expected to adjust. When my sister needed help, my schedule was flexible. When plans changed, mine were the first to be moved. At holidays, I arrived early to set the table and left late to clean it. Compliments came wrapped in comparison. "You're so low maintenance. You don't make things difficult." I learned that love was easier to receive when it cost nothing. When I announced my engagement, the response followed the same script. No excitement, just logistics. Questions about income, stability, appearances. My mother asked if I was sure this was the life I wanted. My father mentioned connections and opportunities one would miss. My sister laughed and said she admired my bravery, the way people do when they mean something else. I smiled and changed the subject. I told myself they would come around. They did not sabotage openly. That would have been obvious. Instead, they eroded. Missed calls returned late. Messages answered with one word. Plans discussed but never confirmed. When I expressed disappointment, I was told not to be sensitive. Everyone was busy. Everyone had their reasons. I absorbed the inconvenience because that is what I had always done. Even then, I kept hoping. I imagined the day itself would reset things. That presence would replace permission. That seeing me stand there would be enough. I underestimated how long a role can trap you. In their eyes, I was still the one who would understand, who would forgive, who would smooth things over later. As I walked alone, it became impossible to ignore what had been true all along. This was not about one decision or one man. It was about where I ranked. I was the option that could be postponed, the feeling that could be managed later. The expendable one. There was grief in that realization, but also clarity. I stopped scanning the room for familiar faces. I stopped listening for footsteps behind me. The silence shifted from punishment to space. For the first time, I did not try to fill it. I let it exist. It held more honesty than the reassurances I had accepted for years. Something in me steadied. I did not feel brave. I felt finished waiting. The boundary was crossed quietly, the way it always was. A week before the ceremony, my mother asked for the broadcast release form. She said a colleague had a friend who could get local coverage. It would be tasteful, she promised. I signed because paperwork had never hurt me before. On the morning itself, I learned what that signature meant. A producer introduced himself and asked where my family would be seated. I said they were running late. He nodded and adjusted the shot. My sister posted a story tagging the location with a laughing emoji. She wrote, "Can you believe this?" It was public, searchable, permanent. That was the moment. Not the empty chairs. Not the laughter. The decision to turn my life into content without asking again. To profit from my humiliation while calling it concern. I felt something detach. The urge to explain dissolved. I did not call. I did not text. I did not ask anyone to take it down. I walked the aisle and said my vows. My voice did not waver. I noticed the red light on the camera and treated it like weather. Present, unavoidable, not personal. When it was over, a staff member congratulated me and asked if my parents would do a quick interview later. I said no. It was the first clean no I had ever given. That evening, my phone filled with messages framed as jokes. Screenshots sent by cousins. Comments asking why I looked alone. I put the phone face down and stayed there. I stopped bargaining for belonging. I chose the boundary without announcing it. The world kept talking. I did not. Silence became my answer, steady and sufficient, and in that restraint I felt ownership return, slowly, without witnesses, without applause, without permission from anyone else. I did not confront anyone afterward. There were no speeches, no group messages, no late-night calls demanding explanations. I simply adjusted access. I stopped filling gaps. I let invitations go unanswered. I returned gifts with quiet notes. Thank you for thinking of us. We are unavailable. It was logistical, not emotional. The consequences arrived on their own schedule. The broadcast aired a short segment, edited for irony. Comments accumulated. Some were cruel. Others asked reasonable questions. Why wasn't her family there? Why did her sister sound amused? My parents issued a brief statement about privacy and misunderstanding. It invited more scrutiny. My sister replied to a stranger with a joke that landed wrong. Screenshots spread faster than apologies. Professionally, things shifted too. People who had watched recognized my husband's name from other coverage tied to a major infrastructure project. His work was solid, documented, and suddenly visible. Invitations arrived addressed to both of us. My parents learned about them secondhand. They called, then texted, then called again. I did not respond. There were practical matters. Estate planning documents that needed updating. Emergency contacts to revise. I handled them methodically. Each task felt like placing a brick where air used to be. Stable. Final. When my mother finally left a voicemail asking when we could talk like adults, I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. The missed calls came later, in clusters. Numbers I recognized. Numbers I did not. I did not count them. I stopped measuring my worth by response time. At home, mornings were quiet. We made coffee. We read the news. Life resumed at a human pace. Peace did not arrive as relief. It arrived as absence. No rehearsed explanations. No waiting for approval. Just forward motion. I kept my name. I kept my dignity. I kept walking, this time with someone beside me, and nothing behind me that required looking back.